The concept of experiential therapy isn't new. There's art therapy, equine therapy, play therapy, but one form you might not be familiar with is cooking therapy. Research tells us that cooking and baking are favorable hobbies of Americans, above reading, time spent with pets, video games, or outdoor activities. So how can we make our love of the kitchen also therapeutic?
Meet Debra Borden. She's a licensed clinical social worker and author of the new book, Cooking is Therapy: How to Improve Mental Health Through Cooking. In today's episode, she shares the science behind cooking as therapy, how to turn any recipe into therapy, or even any non-recipe into a therapeutic experience. Let's dive in.
I think that I had just as much fun prepping for this episode as I did recording it. And wow, like Debra she is fun.
People are really going to like her. She's kind of a spitfire. I really enjoyed talking to her.
Yes, and she,
in a good way.
Well, and she seems like such she's an innovator, which I love. Like she's constantly like trying to like do more in her career, which I think is like, I'm like, oh,
in her field.
I want more of you in my life.
Yeah.
So do you want to read her bio? Because it's pretty impressive.
Yes. Debra Borden is a licensed clinical social worker in New York and New Jersey and a novelist. Known as the Sue Therapist, Debra has spent over 2 decades helping people discover how everyday kitchen tasks become powerful tools for healing. Her unique approach to therapy has been featured in the New York Times, Bon Appetit, Women's Health, and on The List TV, among others. Corporate clients like Bloomingdale's, Crayola, and Mount Sinai have brought Debra in to demonstrate how cooking therapy can reduce stress and spark meaningful change. Debra is also the author of 2 novels with Random House, Lucky Me and A Little Bit Married, and countless essays and articles on family, relationships, and personal growth.
She is super impressive. And now I want to go check out her novels.
Yeah, let's bring her on.
So welcome, Debra. We are really excited to have you. I think that Carolyn and I have been very much looking forward to this episode, with all of our schedules, it took a couple of weeks to like make this come to fruition, but your book is awesome. We cannot wait to dive into the science, and also hear more about this practice of like cooking as therapy. So welcome to the Happy Eating Podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. And as always, I look forward to sharing about this subject, which is newish, but I'm so passionate about.
Yeah. So one of the things that haven't talked about yet, because we did do a little chatting before we started recording, is the way that you got into this. Do you want to share with our listeners, because it was not a direct trajectory.
You didn't learn it in school and anything like that. Yeah.
I'm teaching some colleagues now, but there was nothing out there for this. So for me, it's really great, because how I fell into it sort of validates what later became the curriculum and the science behind why it works. I was working for the state of New Jersey. They had a wonderful program called in-home therapy, and I was hired to bring therapy to families that could only access therapy if it came to them, for a variety of reasons. And so I was often working with adolescents in the afternoon who'd been in school all day, were already having some issues, and the last thing they wanted was after school homework they had to do, which a lot of them probably weren't going to do, but to sit and talk for 2 hours. That was the thing. It was great on paper, but 2 hours with anyone, even an adult, let alone a 16-year-old boy, is
oh my goodness,
just really tough. And also with the families, many of whom had worked all day, now had to come home, make dinner, do all that, but then had 2 hours with me. So with the teens, I was trying so hard to get them to buy in, develop rapport, but I couldn't really get them to self-reflect, show insight, really give much of anything. It was frustrating for me because, you're a helping professional, and I really felt that I wasn't being successful. So I got certified in play therapy. I invented games with them like feelings Jenga. And one whole session could be writing feelings on blocks because they just weren't used to identifying emotions and feelings. And I know a big word in therapy is resistant, which I hate that word. Um, a lot of people just haven't had practice at thinking about what they're feeling, let alone sharing it. So going through a lot of things and trying that, just had a brainstorm one day. I love to cook. I was cooking. It was nurturing and zen and feeling great. And I thought, you know what, here's an activity. Maybe I can, cook with them and see, we'll be side by side. I had already started to think of a few metaphors. I think the first one I did was shaping something and asking, do you think you can shape your future? So it kind of gave me a blueprint for talking with these kids and families. And what was also so great, and that's when I started to delve into the science of it, was that when you're doing something tangible, it frees you up in a way to be more creative and more solution focused. And in the book, I talk about how people like Harry Truman and Steve Jobs knew this, maybe just intuitively, because they would insist on walking meetings with colleagues and employees. And so working side by side just freed up the clients. You weren't in that traditional dyad, which I often call like Stalag 17. The lights are on you. Tell me how you're feeling.
Yes. Do I have to lie down in the sofa? Can I sit in this chair?
Yeah.
It actually, when you talked in the book about how it was beneficial that you were side by side with them opposed to face, or opposite maybe each other when playing Jenga or whatever, that I thought about all of this stuff that I have read about parenting, right? So Carolyn has 2 teenagers. I have 2 tweens, basically, preteens, whatever you want to call them. And so we're always talking about parenting. And I thought, there's a lot to be said. Everybody always says, like, you get a lot accomplished with kids of this age when you're in the car, because
I know.
you hear a lot if they've got their friends, but they're either sitting in the back seat or they're sitting in the front seat next to you. And so it's a great time to have a conversation without them feeling, pressured to deliver, an answer, right? Because you're not staring at them. And so I loved that, like, you then took something that I know of from like the car experience that I know works and translated it into like, oh, this actually works in the kitchen too.
Yes, and I wish I could say, oh, I thought of that and decided to do it. Sort of in reflection, I went like, my aha moment. It's the carpool. There's something about that where they don't, even with when they have their friends, it's like and you're invisible, even though you're not. They sort of start talking and sort of forget.
Yeah.
You're just that driver person. Um, but anyway, what I realized, and I didn't mention this, but think of a 16-year-old boy. It's 4:00. He's just come home from school. They're starving.
Yes.
Carolyn actually has a 15-year-old
I'm living that right now.
Right? And I remembered also, I used to work with at-risk teenage girls in a high school and in a group. And when I would bring food, they would chat more. And, it just opened up and they would talk more if there was food. But anyway, what I realized was now I sort of could free them up a little. And this was just the very beginning. I said, but you know what? This is great. I'm going to try it. And I had started a business based on this called Counseling to Go. And it was rather schizophrenic for me because here I was in a lot of subsidized housing developments. And then in my private practice, it was private pay and some very wealthy families with different issues. But they loved having someone come to work with their kids in their home. And so I just realized very quickly that and not every session, obviously you can't do a cooking therapy session in place of talk therapy, but in addition to it. And I just realized that especially the teenagers got super comfortable sharing when they were doing. And really my first absolute success, I think I write about it in the book, was with a young lady who the father had left and married his assistant and had a new baby. And mom was doing the absolute opposite of anything any therapist ever told her to do. Bad mouthing the husband and bitter and really tough on this teenage girl. She wouldn't even answer to her own name. I had to call her the name of a heroine in one of the trilogies that was out in the movies without identifying it. And anything you asked her, I mean, the school had called me and the parents had called me, and even she had had police trouble, had to have therapy. And you would ask her, and so what about this? Oh, no, everything's fine. No, it's all good. No, I don't know. I don't know what they're talking about. I could not get through to her till I had her making meatballs. And when she had her hands in the meat, because that's the only way to make meatballs, got to get dirty, she started squeezing it. And then she looked up at me and said, "This is what I'd like to do to my baby sister." Like squeezing.
So dark,
but it was so great because it was like the first real emotion.
Yes.
And so then really I knew I was onto something with that.
Gosh, I love that.
Yeah.
So you got the ball rolling, and then at some point you dove into the science because you include it in your book. So tell us a little bit about what does the science say? I mean, it works, yes, but what else?
So what I did, I started to research, and I knew with the book, it just couldn't be stories. And what I also knew, I was very involved as a clinician with substance abuse and psychiatric problems for adults and children. And I knew a lot of people in the rehab world and residential treatment world. And they were always adding experiential therapies. Some of it, I think, because there's boredom in therapy. In fact, they say a lot of people leave therapy because they're just bored, traditional therapy. And I learned from them that a lot of people respond to experiential therapy because it hits different parts of the brain. So they had on staff, doctors and scientists, and neuroscience was really taking off in terms of addiction and what's lacking in the frontal cortex, what's lacking in the amygdala, or what's firing in the amygdala. And apparently, experiential therapies are extremely giving in terms of all the feel good chemicals. And I realized I had to sort of make a curriculum. And this was sort of like just as COVID hit as well. And so, oh my gosh, people, how many people did like sourdough starter during
Yes.
COVID? And all of the cooking was going on. And just started researching that tangible activities hit different parts of the brain, can replace serotonin in many ways. And
Right.
The thing is with culinary therapy, the science was at a very foundational level. People realized that it made a residents or clients happy,
Mhm.
when they were cooking. But nobody had really taken it to a clinical level. They were having cooking, they were having memory
Mhm.
and warmth, and Nana's baked brownie, all of that, which is great, and it is very nourishing and scientifically rewarding
Mm-hmm.
and mood
Yeah.
elevating. But I knew that there was a way to sort of package this in a credible modality. I had done equine therapy, I had done sand play therapy, art therapy. I had done all these and I knew myself how powerful it was. I just knew I had to figure out the components that would be like a really credible clinical event or session.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, I created this 3M curriculum drawing from mindfulness, which, by the way, in cooking therapy, there are moments where we breathe, but I sort of call it active mindfulness. Because in addition to being still, which is very important, it's at the very beginning of every session for me, it's also about noticing. I call the mindfulness piece noticing,
Mhm.
noticing the smells and stopping, and how does it make you feel, like not just like plowing through,
Mm-hmm.
noticing the sizzling, so the sounds, just noticing where you are, even not taste yet, but just being present, just
Mhm.
noticing how you feel. And then the metaphors are, really that's the ultimate clinical piece, because you can, and my clients teach me metaphors that I never even thought of, but there's such great portals to explore and self reflect. And then, not to rush through, but mastery. I mean, I say if I could script a success into every client's day, whether they're with me or not, I just did a video about mastery and success, and it doesn't have to be having a book published. It's that you got the kids off to school.
Yeah.
And we don't fill ourselves enough with reward.
Yeah.
So that was a very important piece for me. I don't know if I've answered your
Yeah.
question.
You
No,
did. You did.
one thing I want to point out for listeners, if we kind of jumped around the experimental therapy, but what helped me understand that a little better is your types of experimental therapy or some of the other types that you mentioned that I was like, oh, okay, I get this, like play therapy and then art therapy. And you even mentioned surf therapy, which I thought was fascinating. So
Oh,
those
it is.
therapies where you're not just sitting there face to face talking, you're doing something. So I just wanted to clarify that for our listeners. But I want to go back to the metaphors, because with our listeners who may not have read the book yet, can you give them some examples of what you're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I made a list here in case I forgot, but
I love that.
so I know that you also at some point want to talk about the recipes that are best suited, what works with this, but what's so cool about culinary therapy is that you can do it outside in or inside out. And what I mean by that is, let's say you absolutely want to make chicken marsala. So we can use all of those ingredients that go into chicken marsala and have a cooking therapy session, whether it's butter melting. So there's a metaphor right there. Let's stop for a minute. We're going from hard to soft. Is there something going on that's maybe keeping you from a better relationship, from something at work, from something you just keep nailing to your kids? I want you to do this or do this or do. Can you soften it? What would that look like? And so there's the metaphor, and then here's little talk part. And believe it or not, if you just said that to someone, they would think about it, right? But looking at that butter melting, I can't explain it. It just has an impact that stays with you. So later, when you talk with your kids or your spouse, or tomorrow when you're at work and you're thinking about maybe I need to soften my tone,
Yeah.
or try it a different way, that butter melting stays with you. And by the way, a very important piece of cooking therapy is I name every recipe.
I love
I
that
And you
do.
part.
might think,
Yes, you
right?
did. You got it's very creative
Tell
names
our
too.
listeners how you
It's
come about with the
it's
recipe
clinical.
names.
It's fun, but it's clinical. So I pulled out chicken marsala, and like I don't know if I could be creative off the cuff, but maybe I would say something like make a change marsala or something like that. I'd put more thought into it if we were, doing it. But then I don't know, there's capers in chicken marsala, I think, or mushrooms, right? So mushrooms, let's just take that. Mushrooms are just filled with water, right? But when you cook them, they shrivel up and it's almost like a reduction, right? When you take something away, things become even more flavorful. Okay, let's talk about that. Maybe you're doing too much. Maybe you're running around like a chicken without a head and you can't even enjoy all the pieces in your life, from family, work, hobbies, exercise, you time, whatever it is. And this I'm just throwing out to you.
Yes.
I love
I don't
this.
remember a specific session where we did chicken marsala, but it's so helpful that way. And in the book, it tells you
Mhm.
how to do it. Um, but let's say you don't know what you want to make for dinner, right? And you walk into your pantry and you say, okay, I have beans, I have some olives, I have pasta, what can I put together? And you decide to just kind of, make a meal of what you have. Well, we can use all those ingredients. And I actually do a lot with olives these days. I do a whole session with one olive or one avocado on anxiety,
Oh.
Mm.
because a big part of anxiety for some people is a secret they've been keeping.
Ah.
We talk about that pit, and that can be a whole session, just that like pit in your stomach. And here's this tangible representation, because secrets can be at the root of a lot of people and why they end up in therapy.
Yeah.
Um, so that's another one. But let's say you say, oh, I'm feeling so stressed. What should I do? What process would be the best for me? I might say chopping. I might say chopping anything from butternut squash to, what I pick, cucumbers, things like that, into parts that you can manage to make a dish. And the reason I would do that is because a lot of people come into therapy with just a sort of amorphous sense that they're not happy, or they're anxious, or stressed, or hopeless, or a malaise, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can't work with that. You need to, the first thing a therapist says to you is, how can I help you?
Mm-hmm.
Well, the therapy starts right there, because now you have to start to break things down and prioritize into one or two, three things that we can work on together. So I would say chopping, but a lot of things come up. I do a lot of baking. Baking can be done in an hour with like cookies or
Mm.
cupcakes, and there's often sifting. Like, hello, we're going to stop right there and sift out the hard parts, or make things thinner so that the cake rises, right? So, do you know in some of my sessions, I physically make people rise up with their hands up? It's physically reach for the sky. It's a verbal metaphor, but it's actually after this, you should try it.
Okay.
Just makes you feel better.
I love that.
I've been known to make people dance as well.
I love that.
Just pulling in the other experiential therapies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's some of the metaphors,
Yeah.
sure.
Well, and as I was going through it, you give metaphors for a lot of the actions like stir or mix or sift. And when I would read them, I think, oh, that's brilliant. Why didn't I think of that? When I'm in the kitchen. Um, so I really liked that later on in the book, you kind of broke down ingredients and how different ingredients and how you could relate them to what's going on and different cooking methods. And, I will have to say that, I have picked up on metaphors before, like when I'm cooking and related it to life. Not quite as not therapeutically necessary, but there is some comfort in finding like, oh, this feels exactly like what I'm dealing with right now. I didn't take it to the next step therapy wise, but I do love the metaphors, and it is for some reason it is kind of easy to relate to an action or a ingredient.
It's funny because, when I self-reflect, for me, I often remember for myself to do it. Just recently, I was, stirring. And I said, oh, you know what? You have not stopped and reminded yourself lately to be more patient. I can be very impatient. I'm like that person driving in the left lane that's saying to you, even though you can't hear me, the left lane is the passing lane, ma'am.
Yes,
You know,
me.
Both of
right?
us.
So sometimes when I'm doing it also, even though I'm not doing a whole session, and I think that's kind of the beauty of it once you learn how to do it. Although I do believe when you make it a therapy session, it really should be, cell phones away and disconnect and carve out that time. And, I'll tell you a little more about how I begin every session. But you can take the pieces of it and, even if you didn't schedule, a therapy appointment for like 6 o'clock on your busy day, when you're sort of like, yes, I want to go to therapy, but oh, I kind of wish I didn't have it today, because so much is going on. Um, you can just pull these pieces out once you learn them
Mhm.
at your own time in your own kitchen. I just think, and that's also just by accident.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
It's
Yes.
very different. I love equine therapy, but I don't have a horse in my backyard.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Or an art therapist in my backyard, although you can do pieces for yourself of art therapy. Um, if you're so inclined to
Yeah.
draw.
Yes.
So
Yes.
Yes.
So, because we've been talking about recipes, and like, is what makes a recipe a good one for cook therapy?
any
I had a
I
feeling
know.
you were going to
I
say that,
know.
but when I originally wrote the question, I was not expecting that to be the answer.
I know that's funny. I know, and I get that question a lot. It's a good question. But again, this morning I had berries with yogurt. It's a breakfast I have all the time. So, blueberries, strawberries, a little bit of melon and banana. You look at that bowl, right? There's your mindfulness moment right there.
Mm-hmm.
And there's color. And you know that, am I living in black and white or color? Not to get too hokey, but we could all use a little color in our day. What is my color going to be today? Well, it's going to be this podcast. Maybe later I'm going to get a manicure. What's the color, the me color that I'm doing today? And also just being still. That's so hard
Yeah.
for so many of us
It really
to
is.
be still. If you think about it, being still for 90 seconds, what does that cost you? But you get antsy
Mm-hmm.
just being still.
Mhm.
90 seconds. Look outside. Look at the leaves. We all do. We get antsy. So that's a learned skill that you can do all the time. 3 meals a day, if you choose to just stop. And then it will translate exponentially if you learn to be still in other areas of your life. I'm someone who's a little more reactive, and I have to learn, to take it down and let it marinate.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
I mean,
I'm looking at you.
I'm like, wow, you're really speaking my language here, Debra. This is really
the
good.
metaphors, you're going to slap me with the metaphors after a while. But so I didn't even get to the yogurt where I'm going to peel off the top and remind myself, what can I peel away today to be a little more accessible, vulnerable, kind, just about anything. And then you've got this cool and creamy kind of, I don't know, set your intent for the day with it. No matter what happens, I'm going to try my best to stay cool and as creamy and mild as this yogurt. So that's my short answer. And you could do it with toast. You could do it with an egg. Oh my gosh, I'm doing a big presentation, an hour lunch and learn for an organization, and I'm going to use hard boiled eggs. Just about taking things from jiggly to hard the way you want. Also, the whole idea of cracking open eggs, and also hard to soft. There's just so much I'm going to play with that. So
I
Oh
love
gosh,
that.
I love that.
I know. You could just go on and on and on.
You really can. I love that.
Stay in the kitchen all day.
yes, I'm very annoying with the metaphors.
No, it's well, you may think it is annoying. I think that the really cool part about it is that you just gave us a handful of examples where hopefully listeners can easily apply it to their everyday life without necessarily feeling like I need to learn how to make sourdough bread.
Oh my gosh, yes. And that I get this all the time, when I'm speaking to groups and somebody goes, I hate to cook, the wrapping's still on my oven.
Yeah.
And but what I say to them is you don't have to love cooking. A lot of people do, and that's why they get drawn to this because they already, get that nice feeling, that foundational feeling. But you have to do something during the day to feed yourself. Like I said, you could do it with a yogurt. I have a lady from a retreat I did 2 years ago that writes to me, thanks a lot, Deb. I can't even make a sandwich without thinking about the layers of my personality. So, and let me share with you, I have done art therapy, which I was a newbie at. I just thought, this is not for me. I am not artistic. I don't draw, and everything I draw looks like it should have been a dog, but it's maybe a goat, or maybe it's from outer space. Okay. But I learned how to draw my emotions. So, I mean,
Interesting.
I am the opposite of Picasso, but I can draw frustration or pain or a secret or joy.
Yeah.
I try to stay very positive and more solution focused with cooking therapy and call things challenges or doing better, and not like, I stink at this.
Yeah.
Or,
Yeah.
You touched on that early in the book. And maybe you can just quickly walk us through it a little bit. What my takeaway, which I have heard this before, but I feel like I need to be reminded of it all the time, is that our brains inherently glob onto the negative.
mm, it's honestly, I just did a video yesterday about giving your accomplishments and successes, large, small, more airtime in your head.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we don't do it. I'm not exactly sure why. We just gloss right over it. Oh yeah, that was great. I did that. Okay, next. But I joke, in 6th grade, I fell flat on my face in front of a boy I liked. What? I still think about this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What?
Why?
I remember the embarrassment and shame, and I was 12. But you know what? I've had a lot of accomplishments since then, small, little ones. I say, you know what? I called that older relative that I had been meaning to call. Yay! Isn't that nice? Look what you did.
Yes.
Yeah.
Um, you gave someone a compliment. A compliment can change someone else's day. This happened to me the other day. I was with my daughter, who's not a clinician, and we were passing this young woman, and her dress was so pretty. And just even as we were passing, I just went, "Ooh, pretty dress." And my daughter said to me, "Mom, you don't know. She might have even been feeling insecure, but you just like changed her night."
Yeah.
And I said, "Yeah, look who raised you." Something got through.
Yes. I love
I love
this.
that.
So yeah, accomplishments, successes, try. That's a learned skill too, like being still. I think there's something we learn. I have to say women especially. We are on some level taught that that's not ladylike or attractive to sort of be so proud. And
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
do you agree? I don't know. I
Yes.
don't have science to back it up.
You're not supposed to boast necessarily
Right.
and I
Yes.
didn't know if that was a Southern female, but it seems to
No.
be, yeah,
I think it's
everyone.
ubiquitous.
Yeah.
It's also going back to your dress example. If you knew the woman and you weren't just passing her, like you might say like your dress is so beautiful, and she might say, "Oh, here's where I got it," or "It was on sale," or something along
Yes.
those lines. And I've read about it in other places, and I mean, I don't know how credible it is, but it's this concept of like we as females, we're not looking to necessarily compete. Like we want to be seen as like just being like a welcome part of the group. So I don't know, but
So
I'm
you kind of
with you.
deflect the compliment and you're like, oh, here's where I got it,
Yes.
somewhat, rather than enjoying and savoring the compliment
Yes.
like we should.
Right. I think you're 100% right. And again, I would have to like sort of like craft a paper about it and do a lot of research, which no, thank you.
Yeah, yeah.
But I think intuitively
Yeah.
we know that. And, like female executives have to deal with things like that and being seen differently if a man had said it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
We know it. I always think about a, a, a session I had, my own session with a therapist, and she talked about breathing and diaphragmatic breathing, and how we as women when we're very young learn to sort of suck our stomachs in. We don't
Mm.
relax when
Yes.
we breathe. So there's a whole place we could go with that. But I also wanted to touch on the CBT part of it, the
Yes.
cognitive behavioral therapy piece,
Yes.
because if you think about accomplishments and successes and how they can change you and fill you instead of perceived failures and flaws, which for some reason we dwell on more, it also has exponential legs. You feel good. You might tell yourself, "Hey, I'm good at that," and then you just feel confident when you walk in somewhere,
Yeah.
and your behavior there is going to be completely different than if you're feeling um, I don't know if I'm good with crowds, and now I'm insecure, and now my behavior is going to be tentative and reticent, and it just changes everything. So I do a lot in session when I can pull it in about self-talk, because we really are not, as a whole, meant to, um, not so kind to ourselves as we should be. It changes everything in my book.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that you did talk a lot about how like the experience of cooking in general leads you to recognizing hopefully like a success. But also you shared a story in there about a a woman who kind of screwed up the recipe along the way, but then was able to like fix it and, get something half, definitely edible at the end. And like that in and of itself was like a metaphor.
Sure. I'll give you a great example of changing self-talk. And it's a personal example. Years ago, I smoked and I took this class called Smoke Enders, which isn't around anymore. But I learned later when I became a therapist that was like an amazing cognitive behavioral therapy structured program, but I didn't know it at the time. And so he challenged us when we would say, "Oh my gosh, but after coffee, that was such a great cigarette, the cigarette with coffee. It was so good." And he said, "Let me tell you something. The minute you put down one cigarette, your body goes into withdrawal, nicotine withdrawal. The next cigarette you have is not good. No cigarette is good. It's actually a relief from pain." He said, "So think of it this way. You have a headache and you take an aspirin and you feel better. Would you ever say, 'Hey, man, that was some good aspirin'?"
No.
No, it's the same thing. So stop thinking about cigarettes as good. Think about it as a relief from pain. And now it changes everything. You're not going to
Interesting.
miss it the same way. You're going to know what it is for what it is.
Yeah.
And the same way, when you're missing any if you're struggling with an addiction to anything, food, exercise, alcohol, work, people have all sorts of addictions, and you're trying very hard not to do it and to be in recovery, and you say to yourself, "Oh my gosh, I really really miss a drink right now. I really miss having that cookie right now." Instead of saying that, if you change it and say, "Aha, I recognize what this feeling is. It's when I used to have a drink, it's when I used to eat dessert, but now I do blank."
Mm.
Fill it in. I take a walk. I brush my teeth. I call a friend. Like, so you just have to be your own powerful friend, because
Yes.
that's the way to put it.
Yes.
And in cooking therapy, we weave that in, all the self-talk, all the positivity.
I
So
love that.
Love that.
yeah.
Well, and my favorite part, I think, towards the end is you actually breaks in some of the recipe chapters, or call them recipe chapters, but you give recipes and you suggest them based on the emotion that you're feeling. Like, is it sadness? Is it anger? Is it I can't anxiety? And then you give at least 3 recipes for each. One is a super simple that, you know, 5 minutes or so.
By time.
One is a little bit longer, and then one, if you really want the full experience in the kitchen, some time in the kitchen, it's longer. But I really love that because I loved everything that you were saying in the earlier part of the book, and I was like, okay, if I'm feeling this, where do I start?
Mm-hmm.
And so I love that you then break it down by emotion and gave some suggestions. Okay, try this, and here's how you're going to walk through the recipe and how you're going to think through it while you're doing it.
Thank you. Yeah, writing the book is different, and we try to sort of package it with every avenue that someone might want to try cooking therapy. Now, if you're like me, I can spend a whole Sunday trying to achieve, the dulce de leche 12-layer cake on the cover of Bon Appetit. And I think a lot of people, that will resonate with, because it's already a leisure activity that they enjoy. But I didn't want, as we spoke about, I didn't want it to prohibit people who just don't like cooking or are too busy to cook from being able to try a full, actually, session, actually, as I might do if I were there with them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think one of them was avocado toast. And I was like, How can
Right.
something so simple, provide therapy? But I love it. I walked through your coaching and
Yeah,
your
it's,
thinking prompts, and
I,
it was fabulous.
I kind of wanted to be like me there with you. But then I hope that people will take it. And like you were saying, you just have a moment where you remember the metaphor. The session itself is powerful and clinical, and that was very important to me that we are able to do that because a lot of people will do a session and take it to their regular therapist.
Mm.
We talked a lot about people getting bored in therapy, and then they do this, and it can kind of come back to traditional therapy and spark something new to talk about and weave in. But I think you said you're maybe after trying a recipe or trying one with your kids, and do it with the kids. I always say,
Yes.
Yes.
you know, like even if they're resistant, force them to do it once. They'll come back to you and say, "Hey, can we do that again?" Um, so I wanted it to be that it could still be the session, but it could be done quickly, medium quickly, or leisurely. So yeah.
I love it.
I love the idea of doing it with kids too, because it gives you that as a parent, it gives you the tools to be able to help them talk through some things, hopefully, in theory.
Yeah.
And I think we all as parents want a little bit of help from a professional as often as possible. So I think that's a really great tip.
The thing with kids are, I'm going to say from 13 down, they're willing, they're in, especially if you're making something they like.
Hmm.
And really don't be secretive with it. But remember, it doesn't have to be tell me about your feelings
Right.
kind of thing. You do it casually, you do it fun. I really haven't mentioned fun enough. It's really okay to have fun in therapy. I always say it's not, therapy shouldn't be like terminally serious. Sometimes you can like have the best aha moments, and even later you'll reflect on, oh, that was so funny when we were laughing, but you know what I heard something there. But so 13 down, just tell them there's this thing out there. I don't know if it's, we'll just try it and just make a recipe together. And then when you're sprinkling the sprinkles, just say, I'm going to think about what I'm grateful. It'll kind of like Thanksgiving table.
Yeah.
Did you ever force everyone to go around the table?
Every
And all,
year. Every year.
so sometimes they just, they make, I'm thankful mom didn't burn the turkey, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But you can script it a little and say something like, I'm going to, I'm going to sprinkle something nice about somebody else in this room. Now you go.
Mm.
Yeah.
And there's just all sorts of ways. Now, I'm going to say 14 up, they're going to give you a hard time.
Yeah.
Okay? So they're going to give you a hard time. But if you get them to the table, and the way you can do it also, you can do a reward. Just cook with me. Just cook with me. You don't have to don't do therapy with me. Don't say that. Just cook with me. Let's put down the phones. Let's disconnect. Let's just have a non tech hour. Okay. What would you like to do with it? We're doing family stuff. The kids love family time, like when you go on vacations or do sports or go to an event, right? They love that. So just sort of try to make it a fun thing. And you'll learn, sort of like the carpool, you'll learn more than you know while sifting through or shaping meatballs. Or you can just sort of spark it and say, well, you bring it, everybody does it. You say, I find I'm not patient. This stirring is reminding me that this will not get done in 5 minutes. I have to
Mm.
wait. What about you? What's like that's my challenge. What challenge do you have?
Mm.
Or something about the future. um, you know, what am I looking to create, right? So now you have this batter. And at the end, you go, oh, it was all like sort of nothing. We couldn't really eat it. It was kind of raw. But now look at what we made. What can we do like that in life? Like, here I am here. How do I want to be this cake or this bread or this cupcake?
Yeah.
What is that for me? It might be making the basketball team. Who knows? Well, with this batter, we had to put in a lot of stuff. We had to do some processes. Maybe we had to whip. So what do you have to do to get to the basketball team in a year or whatever? So I don't know. I just threw that out there. By the way, if I'm going to do a cooking therapy session with someone, I always have a phone conversation first, learn a little bit, about what's going on. And then, I would sort of craft something. Also, remember, you could do it with any food issues. If somebody is dairy-free, gluten-free, meat-free, kosher, celiac, whatever it is, you could pick you could do it with any recipe.
Yeah.
And answer Brierley to your question, what's the best recipe? Whatever you have and want to do.
Yeah, which I love that. There's no pressure to like pick something, special
or sourdough bread.
Yeah. I mean, like if we had gotten on here and you had told me that I needed to work on making sourdough bread, I've been like, well, this has been a lovely conversation. I am exiting the chat now.
Oh my gosh.
But I know that
they named the starter George, and it's like crazy.
And it's for some people it's their thing, and I love that. But that sends me running.
Yeah.
So that's funny. Yeah. Me too.
So tell our listeners, as we start to wrap up, tell our listeners where they can find you. And we are going to link your book in the show notes so they will know where to find your book. But if they want to follow along with you or connect with you, what's the best way?
So on all of the social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, YouTube's, it's at Debra Borden. Pretty simple.
Okay, great.
My website, you can find me at debraborden.com, but my website right now, where I'm offering like a free bonus, is cookingastherapybooks.com. And if you go on to that, you'll also be able to sign up for my newsletter, Therapeutic Bites, and you'll get, I think the bonus is like a therapy kitchen kit with cards, and that'll come to you if you order the book from that site.
Very cool.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah.
But I do a lot of videos. So if you go like even on Instagram today, I do 2 different videos. One, cooking therapy tip of the day. And I also do Alpha Better University. So Alpha Better U. And I pick a letter, and believe it or not, we did mastery yesterday, I think. Today's letter is M for mastery, and a lot of what we talked about today. So
interesting.
That is awesome. And kudos to you for doing tips of the day. That's a
big commitment.
As content creators, we all know that is a very serious commitment. So bravo.
So, well, I must confess that my social media person does recycle them.
That's okay.
So not always, but I'm sure you've missed one. Not everybody's tuning in.
Exactly.
So some of them come back. I don't do it every day. I kind of like to have makeup and my hair done.
Yeah.
Right.
I understand.
I get that. There's only so much a filter can do.
Yeah.
Well, this was amazing.
I know. Thank you so much. I can't wait to share this book with our listeners, and I appreciate you talking with us.
Thank you so much for having me, you guys. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for joining us for the Happy Eating Podcast. I'm Brierley Horton.
And I'm Carolyn Williams. If you liked this week's episode, then don't forget to rate and leave us a review on iTunes. And be sure to hit the subscribe button so you'll never miss a new episode.
We can't wait to have you back at our table next week for a brand new episode. Bye.
The contents discussed in the Happy Eating Podcast, such as advice, studies, text, graphics, images, and other material discussed or presented on the site or podcast, are for informational purposes only. Content is not intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your mental health professional or other qualified health providers with any questions you may have regarding your condition. Never disregard professional advice or delay in seeking it because of something you have heard on the Happy Eating Podcast.
If you are in crisis or think you may have an emergency, call your doctor or 911 immediately. If you're having suicidal thoughts, call 1-800-273-TALK, that's 8255, to talk to a skilled, trained counselor at the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. If you are located outside the United States, call your local emergency line immediately.